The courtroom was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from order, but from discomfort. The bailiff called the next case, and heads barely turned. Just another vagrant, people thought. Another burden of society, a wrinkle on the city's image. They would rather iron away. But when Ethan Cole entered in handcuffs, every step he took sounded like a memory being dragged across a marble floor. He was a man out of place, not just in the court, but in time. His weathered face, partially obscured by the frayed collar of a donated jacket, told stories older than the court's walls. Deep-set eyes cast downward, shoulders hunched, not in guilt, but weariness. His presence didn't ask for pity, it asked to be left alone. "Name?" the court clerk asked, not unkindly, but without expectation. Ethan raised his head with effort. His voice, though cracked from disuse, carried something that didn't match the grime on his clothes. "Ethan James Cole," he said, "Sergeant, First Class, United States Army." There was a pause, brief, barely perceptible. But the judge heard it. Judge Claire Whitman, seated at the bench, flipped through the manila file casually at first. Trespassing, public disturbance, resisting arrest. A familiar pattern for those who had nowhere to go. But when she reached the second page, her fingers stopped moving. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes locked on one line. Cole Ethan J. Operation Phantom Fury, Fallujah. She hadn't heard that name in years, not since the day a folded flag was placed in her parents' arms, not since the day her younger brother, Lieutenant Ryan Whitman, died in Iraq. Claire's gaze slowly returned to the man now sitting at the defense table. Could it be him? Across the room, the prosecutor cleared his throat and stood. "Your Honor, the defendant was found loitering behind La Esperanza Café on Jefferson Street at 11:42 p.m. This marks his third citation for trespassing in many months. The cafe owner has filed repeated complaints. We request a 30-day exclusion from the downtown business zone and 40 hours of community service." Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his head. But a faint shift in his hands betrayed him. Old bones adjusting to familiar shame. What the prosecutor didn't say, but Claire quietly noted, was that behind that cafe was a vent that blew warm air from the kitchen, and that Ethan Cole hadn't been panhandling or harassing customers. He'd simply been sitting, eating half a sandwich, trying to stay warm in a city that had long since forgotten his name. "Mr. Cole," Claire said, her voice even, controlled, "do you have legal representation today?" He lifted his eyes for the first time. "No, ma'am. Public defender's tied up in another court." "Would you like to speak on your behalf?" He nodded faintly. Then slowly he stood, not to defend himself, but almost as if standing were an act of memory. "I got no excuses, Your Honor," he said softly. "I wasn't bothering no one. I was just cold. That's all. Is there a reason you chose that particular location?" His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "I knew the cook," he said. "Miguel, his dad served with me. Gulf War. He lets me sit back there sometimes, gives me food when there's extra. Just for a minute or two, to feel something other than cold." Claire swallowed hard. The room seemed smaller now, tighter. "Your military service?" she asked, though protocol didn't require it. He didn't hesitate. "United States Army, 1980 to 2005, Sergeant First Class, 1st Infantry Division, Iraq, Fallujah." The room remained silent, save for the subtle hum of fluorescent lights and the scratching of pens on notepads. Claire didn't speak. Not yet. She only leaned back in her chair, her fingers tightening slightly around her pen. Because she knew that name. She knew Fallujah. And she knew that once, long ago, her brother had written home about a sergeant who pulled him from gunfire, bleeding and broken, and carried him to safety. The name in that letter was Ethan Cole, and now that same man stood before her, not as a hero, not as a soldier, but as a forgotten soul in handcuffs, hoping for warmth in a world that no longer looked back. She didn't say a word, but inside her, something shifted, and the past had just walked into her courtroom. Judge Claire Whitman sat alone in her chambers, the courtroom door still swinging gently shut behind her. For 20 years, her bench had been her armor. Composure, neutrality, the law, these were her weapons. But now, with the file of Ethan Cole still open on her desk and that name pulsing like a forgotten drumbeat in her ears, the armor cracked. She opened a drawer slowly and reached into its back corner. Her fingers closed around a worn photo, creased at the edges, but kept close for decades. In it, a younger Claire stood beside her brother Ryan, his Marine uniform crisp, his smile easy and proud. It was the day he was promoted to lieutenant, the last time she ever saw him alive. Beside the photo lay a letter, its envelope yellowed, the ink slightly faded, but its weight eternal. She unfolded it with care. April 18th, 2004. Dear Claire, don't tell Mom and Dad, but yesterday we almost didn't make it. There was an ambush outside Fallujah, all chaos. A young corpsman went down and I ran for him. I caught shrapnel in the thigh. I remember falling, trying to crawl. Then out of nowhere, someone lifted me, carried me like I weighed nothing. Sergeant Cole. I didn't know his first name then, just Cole. He moved through fire like it didn't matter. Laid me behind a wall, gave me morphine, went back out for others. I tried to stop him. He said, no soldier gets left behind, not on my watch. If I die out here, and I hope I don't, know that I had a front row seat to real courage. Claire placed the letter down, her hand trembling. 2 weeks after that letter arrived, Ryan was gone, an IED on a routine patrol. They said it was quick. They said he didn't suffer. They said everything you're supposed to say to the families of the fallen. But no one ever mentioned Ethan Cole again. She had tried to find him, wrote letters, called bases, searched. All she got back was, Sergeant Cole was redeployed. Then later, honorable discharge, classified medical records, no contact listed. And now he sat in her courtroom wearing a borrowed coat and handcuffs. A knock at her door pulled her back into the present. Claire? A familiar voice asked. She didn't even look up. Come in, Andrew. Andrew Mason, her late husband's closest friend and law partner, stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His silver tie was slightly loosened, a rare informality for a man known for his polish. I saw the case file, he said quietly. That's him, isn't it? Claire nodded. The man who carried Ryan, the one I've been looking for all these years. He's not just a name anymore. He's broken, forgotten. Andrew sat across from her, his expression softening. Do you want to recuse yourself? She shook her head. No, I won't lose him again. I lost Ryan. I won't lose the man who gave us those extra 2 weeks. Andrew hesitated, then leaned forward. Claire, the system failed him. You know that. PTSD, VA red tape, job losses, no support. He's not the only one, but he's one we can still help. She looked up slowly, the fire returning to her voice. Then we will. Back in the courtroom, Ethan sat still. His hands were now unshackled, but he held them clasped tightly in his lap. He didn't expect much. He never did anymore. Then the courtroom doors opened again. Andrew Mason walked in, a leather briefcase in hand, and took a seat beside Ethan. Ethan looked at him, puzzled. I didn't call no lawyer. You didn't have to, Andrew replied softly. We called you. From the bench, Judge Whitman returned. Her expression was unreadable. Her voice was smooth, yet laced with something new, something personal. Mr. Mason, she said, has your client been advised of his rights? He has, Your Honor, Andrew replied, and we request time to present new evidence on behalf of Sergeant Cole. There it was. The title, spoken aloud. Not defendant, not trespasser. Sergeant. Ethan didn't move. But deep inside him, something did. The courtroom, once draped in silence, now simmered with something else. Not noise, but tension. The kind that thickens in the air when something deeply personal brushes against a system that's supposed to be impersonal. Sergeant Ethan Cole sat quietly beside Attorney Andrew Mason, his eyes darting between the polished floors and the unfamiliar warmth of someone speaking in his defense. He'd grown used to being invisible, forgotten, unwanted. But now each word spoken seemed to carve a hole through the fog that had wrapped around his life for decades. Judge Claire Whitman looked down from the bench, gaze steady but unreadable. She didn't blink, didn't betray herself, but her grip on the gavel had subtly tightened. "Mr. Cole," she began, voice low and direct, "your military file states that on April 17th, 2004, during Operation Phantom Fury, you served with the Brigade Infantry Division in Fallujah. Can you confirm this?" Ethan shifted as if the question had blown dust off an old wound. He sat up just a little straighter. "Yes, ma'am," he said slowly. "That's correct." "And during that operation," she continued, "was there an incident involving a wounded Marine, a lieutenant, pinned down during an ambush?" A beat passed, then another. Ethan's eyes flickered. First confusion, then memory, then something heavier. "Yes, ma'am, there was," he said, his voice lowered, growing steadier as he spoke. "The kid's name was Whitman, Lieutenant Ryan Whitman. He ran toward a fallen corpsman under fire. Got hit in the thigh. I saw him go down." In the gallery, several heads turned. A silver-haired man wearing a Marine Corps League jacket leaned forward, his mouth slightly agape. "I reached him," Ethan continued, "got him behind cover. He tried to order me to leave him. Said to get the others out first. Typical officer, thinking about everyone else. I ignored him, of course. Stayed with him until the medevac came. He made it out. I heard later, he didn't make it back home." His voice trailed off, but his posture didn't collapse. Not this time. His voice held the weight of both guilt and reverence, of a memory lived in slow motion. The courtroom was silent. Then, from the back of the room, the silver-haired veteran stood abruptly. His voice cracked with urgency. "That's him," he said, pointing. "That's Sergeant Cole. I was there that day. I was one of the 6 he saved." Claire didn't bang her gavel. She didn't need to. The prosecutor stood, clearly flustered, his voice shaky with an objection forming. "Your Honor, while the defendant's military service is admirable, I'm not sure how relevant—" "It is relevant," Claire said sharply, silencing the room. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut clean through. She turned to Ethan again. "Sergeant Cole," she said, her tone shifting slightly, less judicial, more human, "do you remember what you said to Lieutenant Whitman as you pulled him to safety?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded faintly. "I told him, no soldier gets left behind. Not on my watch." Claire exhaled slowly as if those words had been echoing in her memory for 2 decades. She stood. "This court will recess for 10 minutes, she said, but then paused. For a brief moment, breaking every rule of the bench, she looked Ethan in the eye and added softly, "When I return, we will have much more to discuss, things that go far beyond these charges." She stepped down from the bench and disappeared into her chambers. The door clicked shut behind her. Ethan blinked. He wasn't sure what had just happened. For years, he had lived like a ghost. Now, a judge had spoken his name like it mattered, like he mattered. Beside him, Andrew Mason whispered gently, "She knows who you are now." Ethan didn't answer, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel cold. 10 minutes later, the courtroom doors opened again, but Judge Claire Whitman did not return alone. Behind her, walking in perfect step, were 3 uniformed Marines, a colonel, a master sergeant, and a young corporal holding a polished wooden case in his gloved hands. Their presence drew a stunned silence across the room. Even the court stenographer paused, fingers suspended above the keys. Ethan Cole, still seated beside attorney Andrew Mason, instinctively tried to rise, old training awakening despite the creak of his knees and the ache in his spine. But Andrew gently placed a hand on his arm. "Wait," he said. "This moment is yours. Let them come to you." The colonel stepped forward and addressed the court with solemn clarity. "Your Honor, my name is Colonel Richard Haynes, United States Marine Corps. We are here today on behalf of the Department of the Navy and the Veterans Reassessment Initiative. Sergeant Ethan J. Cole's service record has recently undergone a full audit and reclassification. We have reason to believe that a great oversight has persisted for nearly 2 decades." Judge Whitman nodded and gestured for him to proceed. Colonel Haynes continued, "On April 17, 2004, during Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah, Sergeant Cole displayed extraordinary heroism while under enemy fire. Intelligence newly declassified confirms that his actions not only saved Lieutenant Ryan Whitman and 5 other Marines, but directly disrupted an ambush that would have decimated an entire convoy." He turned toward Ethan. "Sergeant Cole, in the name of the Secretary of the Navy and recognition of your unwavering valor in combat, we are here to present you with the Navy Cross, the second highest military honor this nation can bestow." The corporal stepped forward, opened the wooden case, and lifted the gleaming metal. The blue ribbons shimmered under the harsh courtroom lights. The air was still, yet charged. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Several veterans in the room instinctively rose. One by one they stood at attention. The silver-haired Marine who had spoken earlier raised a trembling hand in salute. Slowly others followed. Men in civilian suits, women with service pins, even the young bailiff, eyes wide with reverence. And finally, even the prosecutor, visibly torn between protocol and human decency, stood. Ethan's face was unreadable, but his eyes shimmered, not with pride, not yet, but with the disbelief of a man who had been unseen for far too long. "This must be a mistake," he said hoarsely. "I was just doing my job. I did what anyone would have done." The colonel's voice softened. "No mistake, Sergeant. This is long overdue." Judge Whitman stood once more. Her voice now carried not only the authority of the court, but the weight of personal truth. "In light of these facts," she declared, her voice trembling slightly, "all charges against Sergeant Ethan Cole are hereby dismissed, with prejudice." She brought down the gavel, but the finality of the sound didn't feel like an end. It felt like the opening of a long-shut door. The master sergeant stepped forward, holding a tablet. "Sir," he addressed Ethan, "we've also been instructed to inform you that your VA file has been updated. You are now rated 100% service-connected disability retroactive to the date of your discharge." Ethan blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means housing, full medical care, education if you want it, and significant back pay," the sergeant said gently. "We'll make sure you're never left out in the cold again." From the back of the room, Miguel Torres, the café cook who had secretly slipped Ethan food for years, approached with red eyes and a shaking voice. "My father served with a man named Cole," he whispered. "Said if I ever met him, I owed him everything. I never thought it was you. All this time." Ethan looked down at the medal now in his hands, then around the room filled with salutes and silence. Something inside him, a decades-old stillness, began to stir. People remembered, not just his rank, not just his medals, his name. Judge Whitman stepped down from the bench. She removed her glasses slowly and crossed the room to where Ethan stood. No longer a judge, no longer speaking from behind a desk, but as a sister. "My brother used to quote you," she said. "He said you told him, 'No soldier gets left behind, not on my watch.'" She looked him in the eye, her voice steady and full. "Today, Sergeant Cole, we finally kept that promise for you." 2 weeks later, Ethan Cole stood in front of a mirror inside an apartment he still couldn't believe was his. It was small but clean, offered by the Veterans Housing Program just days after the courtroom hearing. There was heat in the walls, food in the fridge, and for the first time in years, a bed that was his alone. On the wall beside him, framed with care, hung the Navy Cross alongside a Purple Heart and 2 service medals. Andrew Mason had tracked them down, recovered from a storage unit that had been auctioned off years earlier when Ethan could no longer pay the bill. Somehow they had found their way back. The knock on the door was soft, deliberate. When he opened it, Judge Claire Whitman stood outside, not in her robe but in a dark blue coat holding a small wooden box. "May I come in, Sergeant Cole?" she asked. He gave her a soft smile. "Just Ethan, ma'am, please." "And I'm just Claire, at least out here." They sat at the small kitchen table. The heater hummed quietly in the background. The air was warm, but the silence between them was heavier than any cold. "I brought something," Claire said, placing the box on the table and opening it slowly. Inside was a bundle of neatly preserved letters, some yellowed with time but treasured. "They're from Ryan," she said. "Letters he sent home while deployed. He mentioned you often." She handed Ethan one envelope, paper thin and careful. He unfolded it with reverence. As he read, his hands trembled. Not from weakness, but from the weight of memory finally returned. April 18, 2004. Mom, Dad, Claire. Yesterday, everything nearly fell apart. If it weren't for Staff Sergeant Cole, I wouldn't be writing this. He did something I still can't believe. Moved through gunfire, dragged me out, took a hit himself, and still went back for the others. He said something I'll never forget. "No soldier gets left behind. Not on my watch. I want to be the kind of man he is. If I can be even half that brave, I'll be proud." Ethan's voice cracked as he finished reading. For a moment, he said nothing. He just stared at the words. The kind of words that could keep a man standing through a decade of cold and silence. "I never knew it," he whispered. "I always thought, maybe saving him just delayed the inevitable." Claire's eyes softened. He lived with purpose in those last 2 weeks. He led a mission to protect civilians. He volunteered, and he wrote that he did it because he wanted to live up to you. Ethan looked away, tears welling but unshed. "You gave him those weeks," she continued. "You gave us those weeks. That matters, Ethan. It mattered then. It matters now." He nodded slowly. There was nothing more to say, only things to feel. And in that quiet kitchen, they sat together. Two people bound not by time, but by a moment in the desert that neither of them would ever forget. As Claire stood to leave, she placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "My brother always said, the true worth of a soldier isn't shown when people are watching, but in what he does when no one is." She smiled. "You lived that, Ethan, even when the world turned away." He looked at her, standing there in the doorway, then at the medals behind him, and finally down at the letter in his hand. "I always wondered if anyone would remember my name," he said softly. Claire held his gaze. "Now the whole world does." Final message. What we learn. True honor doesn't come from medals. It comes from doing the right thing when no one is looking. Never forget those who gave everything, and never let them be forgotten.